All right, so here's the second type of question that we'll see. So we want to determine whether each function has a maximum or minimum value, right? So basically, when we're given a quadratic, it's pretty easy to tell if it's facing up or down just by looking at the function, as long as it's in standard form or even some different types of forms like vertex form. But basically, the key is we want to look at A, all right? If A is positive, that means it's gonna be facing up. Okay, so if A is positive, that means it's facing up, and that means we're gonna have a minimum, right? Because our vertex is gonna be at the bottom, right? And the minimum is always the y value of the vertex. So if this is h and k, the minimum is gonna be k. The minimum and maximum are always k, whatever the output or the y value of the vertex, okay? So when a is greater than 0, we're going to have a minimum, and it's going to be an upward facing parabola. All right, and when a is less than 0, it's going to be a downward facing parabola, and so in which case you're going to have a maximum. Okay. All right, and it's still going to be hk, but in this case it'll be a maximum. All right, so k is the maximum, and k is the minimum, but it's just you have to know which when is it which, right? I don't know, when is it which? I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, when each happens, right? So you can go through here and just look at a. Remember, a is the coefficient of the quadratic term. So here, like a is 6, so it's going to be upward facing, which means we're going to have a minimum, right? And we'll just have to find out what it is. Okay, here, so because here a is greater than 0, right? Here we have a negative a, right? A is less than 0, therefore it's going to be facing down, and we're going to have a maximum, right? Okay, because we're going to vertex is going to be on the tippy top, right? Okay, here we have a positive 1, so a is greater than 0, so we're going to have an upward facing parabola, which means we're going to have a minimum, right? And so forth and so on. So we can go through there and easily find if it's a max or a min, right? Real quick. Number 7, we have a is less than 0, it's negative, so we're going to have a downward facing parabola, so it's going to be a maximum. Okay, so you can go through and find whether it's a min or max pretty easily just by looking at it, right? Now to find the value, we want to find that value. That's when we're going to have to do. That's when we're going to have to use our formula for the vertex, right? So remember that x equals negative b. Let me put it up here actually. X equals negative b over 2a. So we're going to use that, right? And remember, that's also h. So let me just change this to h because that's the x value of the vertex, right? And then remember that k is f of h. So once we find h, we're going to plug it into the function and we'll find the output. Okay, so here we go. So let's find h. So negative b, so here the b is 0 in this one because we don't see it. And then 2 times 6, right? So that's just going to come out to be 0. So that's what the h value is. So now to find k, we're going to do f of 0. Okay, this is h. So to find k, we're going to do f of h. So f of 0, if I plug in 0 here, it's just going to be 6 times 0 squared, which is going to be 0, right? So my minimum value is 0. Okay. All right. And you don't have to write this, but the vertex happened to be 0, 0 in this case, right? And so we want the y value of the vertex, which we call k. All right, let's check out this next one. Next one's going to be very similar. This time it's a max, but everything is pretty much the same, right? If I'm going to find h equals negative b, which is 0, over 2 times a, which is negative 8. And so it's just going to be 0 divided by negative 16 which is just 0, right? To find k, we're going to plug in 0 for x and figure out the output. So if I put 0 in here, I'm going to get out 0, right? Negative 8 times 0 squared is 0. So our max is 0 here. Okay. All right, now number 6 is going to be a little different because here we have actual b. So let's find h first. So let me erase some of this stuff here. So h equals negative b, which is 2, over 2 times a, which is 1, right? So it'll be negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. So that's h. So now k is going to be f of negative 1, right? So I'm basically going to plug in negative 1 to this. So it's going to be negative 1 squared plus 2 times negative 1. So that'll be positive 1 minus 2, which is negative 1. All right. Let's do a couple more and then we'll be done. So for number 7, let's find h. So h equals negative b. So b is positive 4 here. Over 2 times a. A is negative 2. Right? And so we end up with negative 4 over negative 4, which is positive 1. So to find k, we're going to plug in 1 to the function, right? So it's going to be negative 2 times 1 squared plus 4 times 1 minus 3. So it comes out to negative 2 because 1 squared is 1. So this goes to 1. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. 4 times 1 is 4 minus 3. So we get negative 2 plus 4 is 2 minus 3 is negative 1. So that's our maximum there. All right. Okay, let's see. Let's try one more. Let's do number 11 here. So first of all, are we going to have a max or a min? So we look at what a is. A is positive 1, right? So a is greater than 0. So that means we're going to have, if a is greater than 0, we're going to have a minimum, right? Because it's facing up. So we're going to have minimum. Okay. So next, let's find h. So h equals negative b over 2a. So b, this is tricky because usually b comes second, but in this case, this is our linear term, right? There's no x there. So that means b equals 0. So we're going to put in 0 here, and a equals 1. And so 0 divided by 2 is going to be 0. So that's our h, or x value of the vertex. Now let's find k, which is f of 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 to this function as my input. So it's going to be 0 squared plus 1, which is just 1. So our minimum is 1. All right, so I'll probably have you do 1 or 2 of these on the Kahoot. On the Play Pause It. All right, but let me know if you have any questions, and that's how you graph quadratic functions, which end up being parabolas, right? And so we know how to graph them, and then now we know how to find the max and the min. Oh, I forgot one thing. Domain and range. So domain and range, those are pretty straightforward once you find the max and the min. Domain is always negative infinity to infinity. So with quadratics, the domain is always negative infinity to infinity. Because as we saw with our graph here, so our domain is always negative infinity to infinity because this will go right forever and this will go left forever. Okay, so our domain is negative infinity to infinity. Now our range, that's a little different. If it's facing up, then it's going to be whatever k is. Remember, the vertex is hk, so it's going to be whatever k is all the way up to infinity, right? So it's going to start at k and then it's going to go up forever, right? So that's when we have a minimum, right? If we have a maximum, or if the parabola is facing down, then it's going to go negative infinity up to k, right? Because it'll go down forever to negative infinity, but it'll stop going up at k, and that's when we have a max. All right, so if a is greater than 0, it's going to look like this. If a is less than 0, it's going to look like this. All right, so going back to here, and I kind of ran out of room here, but let's pick one or two of these. So here the domain we know is going to be negative infinity to infinity, right? That's pretty straightforward. The range, since we have a min and this is facing up, we're going to go from -1 to infinity, right? Okay, because we have a minimum, we're going to start at -1 and we're going to go up forever. Okay, if we have one like number 5 where we have a max, we know our domain is going to be negative infinity to infinity, always, right, with the quadratic. Our range, this time we have a max, we're going to go up to 0. So 0 is going to be our right endpoint, and we're going to go from negative infinity up to 0. Okay. Now, one thing I made a mistake on that I just realized is that we should have brackets here, right? Because we're actually going to reach 0. That's part of it. So, so infinities, you'll have parentheses, of course, but on your k side, you're going to have brackets because we're actually going to reach the vertex, right? So I should put brackets here and brackets here. All right. All right, yeah, let me know if you have any questions. And now you're an expert at graphing parabolas, maybe with a little practice first, but now you know everything you need to know.